Excellencies, good people of Tromsø, dear friends. Welcome to the Fram Center and to this Arctic Frontiers Open, adapting to climate change, organized as a collaboration between the Arctic Frontiers and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This weekend, Tromsø has had a prominent visit. Some 21 UN ambassadors has been here as part of the Norwegian campaign to get the open seat in the UN Security Council. And we are very proud to be part of this program and to organize some of the sessions in collaboration with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And during this week, we have had discussion and exchanged knowledge and perspective on the ocean, paradoxes attached to economic development and protection, effects of climate change, and how we are all connected. Science collaboration and the importance of letting data knowledge be open and accessible. We have discussed the Arctic in a geopolitical context, in an increasingly more unpredictable world, and how dialogue across borders and sectors is extremely important. How investing in trust is vital for us all. And this is essentially what we do in Arctic Frontiers. We bring people, knowledge, and perspectives together to build trust and understanding and to help pointing towards a sustainable future. What we also do is to bring these discussions out of the closed rooms of experts, business leaders, and politicians to the public, to the piazza, like here today. And these past few days, information and knowledge sharing has been in the center of attention. It has been extremely interesting to hear the distinguished ambassadors share their knowledge and their perspectives. And this is what we will do here also now. And I'm looking very much forward to hear the four excellencies in the panel and in dialogue with experts here from the Fram Center. So again, welcome, and on that note, I would like to give the floor to State Secretary Jens Frølich Holte. Please, Jens, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a big pleasure to come here to Tromsø, and not least the Fram Center. I see this beautiful new building here. I was here when the foundation stone was laid, but I haven't seen the result of that foundation stone. And now it's a nice building and a place to gather to discuss important topics. We are lucky to have with us UN ambassadors from a wide range of countries that are really seeing the effects of climate change today. And I think that will provide the basis for a very good discussion here today. Climate change is not only undermining the world's effort to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, it's fueling instability, it's contributing to conflicts, even breeding political extremism, and it's also threatening the existence of very nations, some of them small island development states. For the Norwegian government, fighting climate change and protecting the oceans is a key priority. When we look at 2019, I believe that this will be the year of ambition. The United Nations Secretary General Guterres has called a big climate summit in New York in the high-level week at the UN in September. Additionally, we have had young people on the street voicing their concern about climate change. So I think in total, these are very clear signals that we need to intensify our efforts. Climate change is it's a problem where you need a multilateral solution. You need global cooperation to reduce emissions. That's the beauty of the international system. When it works at its best, it can deliver these solutions. The Paris Agreement is a very good example. The world coming together pointing at a way to get on and showing some climate action. Now Norway is trying to increase our efforts. We're going to strengthen our nationally determined contribution in the Paris Agreement. We're going to submit a low emission strategy to the UN, where we are proposing how we are reducing emissions by 80 to 95% in 2050. Of course, these are targets. They will have to be followed by climate action every year, leading up to 2050. But we are well ahead on the domestic in the domestic policy. Just a few days ago, the government announced the support of 2.3 billion Norwegian kroner to an offshore wind project. So things are happening. Of course, we need more to happen in the future. But internationally, we are also trying to do our share. Total climate and ocean finance will in 2019 reach 6.8 billion Norwegian kroner. We have a very big global engagement. We contribute to the UN Green Climate Fund, increased amounts. We are also working globally to protect the world's forest, which of course is in a grave situation right now. But we need to also look a bit further. And I think we need to work along two paths going forward. The first path is, of course, to reduce emissions along the lines of the Paris Agreement. But the second part, which is as important, is to look at ways of building resilience against natural disasters and also adapting to the impacts of climate change. Because, reducing emissions is of little help for Pacific Islanders or subsistence farmers in the Sahel, who are already finding it harder day by day to protect their livelihoods. So Norway is determined to step up our international efforts when it comes to adaptation, preparedness, and fighting hunger. So we're going to launch a new strategy very soon. It's in the making in the ministry, and I really do hope that will, also increase our efforts in the resilience and adaptation area, and while also we're working with emission reductions. So the United Nations Secretary General Guterres, he has used very strong words on climate change. He's saying that climate change is moving faster than we are. This is a race that we have to win. Norway is, of course, as a consistent partner, doing our share to reduce emissions, building resilience globally. But there is a lot to be done, and I really hope that the discussions we have today with a great panel will shed some more light on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, State Secretary. Now we are getting ready to start the discussions, and it's a great pleasure for me to introduce our moderator, competent, engaged, smart. Please welcome student at the University of Tromsø, Alexandra Seljeseth.
Thank you for that great introduction, Ole. And climate change affects us all. And here in the Arctic, we see the changes very close and more clearly every day. So I want to know how the situation are in other countries that, even though they are on the other side of the globe from us, experience many of the same issues as we do here. And what can we learn from each other, and how can we fight the global Arctic changes together? So first, I want to invite up our excellencies. First of all, I want to invite up Mrs. Jane Chigiyal from the Ambassador of Micronesia. Please take a seat. Welcome. And then I want to invite up Mrs. Loreen Ruth Bannis-Roberts, the Ambassador of Dominica. Welcome. And Mrs. Martha Ama Akia Pubi, the Ambassador of Ghana. and Mr. Masood bin Momin, the ambassador of Bangladesh. Welcome. So welcome to our panel, and firstly, Our Excellencies, I have a question for all of you, which I would want you to answer. Maybe we can start here. And the question is, please tell us how you notice the climate changes in your countries, and how do you react to it and build resilience, and how do you collaborate with other states on this issue? So if you would want to start.
Thank you very much for the question. Before I try to answer it, let me recognize the State Secretary, colleagues, friends. Thank you for this opportunity. I want to just share that I am from the Federated States of Micronesia. It's a group of islands in the Pacific. We have 607 islands. The lowest point is 3 feet. The highest point is 1,500 feet. We are called the Big Ocean State because our ease is 2.5 million square kilometers. The climatic challenges for us, and I'm sure it's shared by all my colleagues here, are sea level rise, frequent and intensified typhoons, and the introduction of new diseases that were not there before. With the low-lying islands that we have, the issue of territorial integrity has become one of value, not only for my country, but for the Pacific region. In the last forum, which your foreign minister attended, Pacific leaders encourage our countries to delimit our maritime boundaries. They envision that many of us will lose our islands and therefore the boundaries, the baselines. So that is a big project now. On the frequent and intensified storms, we see that, but one of the challenges that we have, we are asked to prove that these are climatic or adverse impacts of climate change. That affects food security, water security. And in responding to typhoons, you bring in imported food when crops are destroyed, and that in itself leads to NDCs. So I want to say that for many of us, we don't contribute to this problem, but we have to prepare to adapt to it.
Thank you. Ambassador Bannis-Roberts, what are your thoughts?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I come from the Caribbean island of the Commonwealth of Dominica. And I say Commonwealth of Dominica because some of you here might Google Dominica and get a little confused. There are two countries with the same name. So I come from the Commonwealth of Dominica, and we are located between the two French departments of Martinique to the south and Guadeloupe to the north. We are a small island developing state with 70,000 people as its population. We also have an indigenous population, the Kalinago people of 3,000, and they reside on a particular side of the island, on the eastern side of the island. We have 365 rivers, 9 volcanoes, and our highest point is 4,747 feet. We are known as the nature island of the Caribbean, and 60% of the country is forest reserve. We promote ecotourism. For us, climate change is real, it's here. We have lived it, we have experienced it. And I want to say to you that I have a story to tell today. On September 18th, 2017, Hurricane Maria visited Dominica, and the island was left completely devastated. Every sector was heavily impacted. 90% of our housing stock gone. Our agricultural sector gone. Trade came to a screeching halt. Tourism heavily impacted. Our education and health sectors, and most importantly, our people were left traumatized. In fact, as we speak, tropical storm Dorian is threatening the island. And Dominica, because of our location, we are located smack in the middle of the chain of Caribbean islands. So any hurricane that is developed off the coast of Cabo Verde, if it goes straight across horizontally, it hits Dominica directly. So every year we are under the threat of severe hurricanes. We cannot escape it. So every year from June to November, it's the hurricane season in Dominica, every 6 months. But Maria changed everything. And our people now are in tune with the weather forecast. They listen every day. And preparedness, preparedness, preparedness. So every sector was heavily impacted. I mean, in 4 hours, Hurricane Maria went from a category 1 to a category 5 at 220 miles per hour. Who could survive this? We lost lives. 74 people were dead. Telecommunications, everything. We just came to a screeching halt in Dominica. And the Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica, he came to the UN 3 days after, and he declared that Dominica was going to do everything to become the first climate resilient nation in the world. Because yes, Maria came, but in every crisis there's an opportunity. And we got the opportunity to build back better. In fact, we've changed that. We are building a new Dominica because we had to start from scratch. So we partnered with the UNDP, and the UNDP came in, and in terms of educating the general public, homeowners were educated as well as our builders and our contractors. So a homeowner knew what the contractor or the builder had to deliver in terms of new roofs. So all the roofs are being constructed in a new way, hurricane and wind resistant. So now it's new concepts. Our building codes had to change. We no longer, because we have 365 rivers, a lot of people would leave or build close to the rivers. You can do that no more because every river overflowed its banks. So people are now moving further inland, and the way they construct is different. So we have had to sensitize the general public. Thankfully, they were very receptive to the new information. Fortunately for us, a number of our global partners or countries that we have diplomatic relations with, they came on board. We were severely impacted, and what we realized is that there was a shortage not only of manpower, but of the technical know-how and expertise. So some countries gave a financial contribution, but others gave technical assistance, which is even more critical. So now we have had to build river walls. The bridges are different, the homes are different, everything, our education system, telecommunications has to be underground. The wiring, no longer can we build and have the lines running above. So it's just a new way, completely different thinking. And obviously, with the traumatization of our children in particular, we've had to bring in counselors to, get them to be calm and what to expect and that sort of thing.
Of course.
Even the religion, there's a prayer that we say every Sunday in the churches to our great Father above, to have the weather be still. So people have this little prayer at home. So it's something that's calming and soothing and prayerful, and it gets them to settle their nerves, that sort of thing. So everything came into play. what we planted, our crops, we do more of the underground root crops instead of the bananas and the plantains that the winds can take away. So climate change for Dominica is not only something we can think of it coming, we've lived it, we've experienced it. And we are thankful that our partners have come on board in a big way for us. We had to partner, otherwise we would have been in this state of despair for a very long time. One last thing, there's one challenge that we have that we cannot seem to wrap our fingers around it, and that is the sargassum seaweed.
Yeah.
It's actually crippling our fishing industry. And we are out there searching to partner with some institution or government who would advise us and assist us as to how do we deal with the sargassum seaweed, because our fishermen can't go out.
Yeah, we can come back to that later as well. And thank you. It's awful to hear about the consequences you've had after Maria, and inspiring to hear how you're building up a society again. And I want to also ask the same question to Ambassador Phoebe. What do you think about your country and your changes?
Thank you very much. And just like my previous colleagues who've spoken, to say a big thank you to the government of Norway and to recognize here State Secretary as well as Arctic Frontiers. And thank you for having us here. Indeed, Ghana, we consider ourselves to be in the center of the world because geographically is longitude 0 and latitude 0. We're just 5 degrees north of the equator. And so when we talk being here, seeing the world as it is a globe, and what happens, it's interesting, what I've learned so far, what happens up here has so much to do with what happens to us. And therefore, being part of this discussion is really very important for us, and I'm glad that we are here today. Definitely, climate change affects everybody. It is quite clear. For those of us in Africa, particularly around the equator, we have seen rising temperatures, extreme weather events, and where we basically are a farming country, much of the population, 60%, is involved in agriculture-related activities, farming and fishing. And so where the rain is unpredictable, you're going to have a lot of difficulties with farm yields. Much of our farming is done by, is climate sensitive. We don't have irrigation systems for the farms and so on. So that affects food security in the country. Then the fishing, the warming of the sea has also affected the catch of the fishermen, and that is affecting other livelihoods. Now, when we have extreme weather situations where you have a drought, then we have bushfires. You know, Ghana is located we start with the savannah, so beneath the Sahara Desert coming down, we do have forests, rainforests, but much of the country is savanna, grassland. And therefore, when we have these dry spells, that causes bushfires and all the results untold hardships for people. Again, we get floods, and that is a challenge to the infrastructure of the country. So what we've invested in for years gets washed away, and that also poses a problem and a challenge for us. Now, I just want to go into briefly what we've tried to do as a country, and a lot of it is in the nationally determined contribution, in our contribution to the Paris Agreement. We identified 20 mitigation and 11 adaptation program of actions in 7 priority economic sectors. And these are sustainable land use, and as I've explained, it's because of how we've managed our forests, how we've managed our water bodies and so on within the land space. Climate-proof infrastructure, sustainable mass transportation, energy security, forest management, and waste management. Now, forest management, because of the indiscriminate felling of trees sometimes and overexploitation of the rainforest. And therefore, we've had the savanna creeping down. And so part of the measure is to ensure that we can reduce the spread of the desert condition. Now, these actions are expected to help us attain low carbon climate resilience through effective adaptation and greenhouse gas emission reductions our target in our NDC unconditionally is 15%. But we know we can go up to an additional 30 if we have the inputs from external support in terms of transfer of technology, financing, and as also capacity building. It's very important for us if we are to attain that 45% reduction. Now, as just to share a few specific actions we've taken, Ghana has invested nearly $20 million recently in the Savannah drylands. And this is to provide access to water to vulnerable farmers in the long dry season, and then input supply and promotion of the adoption of sustainable land technologies for rural farmers. This is also to build their capacity and help them to see how they can farm, even with the conditions that we are facing. Then through the sustainable water and land management, what we call the adaptation fund projects, women are also being supported to improve their livelihood activities and in protecting and management of land. In our culture, women have a lot to do with the conservation of land, and so we are enhancing their capacity to do this more effectively and to build the resilience that they need. We have also established a tree planting project, about 192,000 hectares. Recently employed 20,000 youth to plant 10 million trees. This is a specific activity aimed at addressing the problem. Ghana has a plastic policy because we recognize that we are drowning our coastal areas with plastic waste. It's affecting the fishing community and the environment in general. And through this policy, we want to do to manage it within the circular economy, in providing job opportunities in recycling from waste to plastic technologies. Now, we recognize that the success of our efforts lies in good governance and intersectoral coordination, which sometimes is not readily available. You need to do these across sectors. We also strongly feel the need for capacity building and the application of science, technology, and innovation, applying them to the indigenous knowledge and making sure that that works for us and it is appropriate.
And this is also something that we will come back to later in the talk, so thank you. And lastly, Ambassador Bin Momen, what is your thoughts on the climate changes?
Thank you. Let me also join my other colleagues in thanking State Secretary and also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Ambassador Mona, and also the Arctic Frontier colleagues here, and also the University of Tromsø colleagues and students. Just before starting, I would like to make some comparisons between Norway and Bangladesh. For example, Norway is 2.6 times bigger than Bangladesh in size-wise. But Bangladesh has a population of 160 million plus, which means it is 30 times bigger than Norway in terms of population size. Most of our elevation is less than 10 meters. With coastal south, terrain is generally at sea level. In Norway, the average elevation is 460 meters, that is 46 times than Bangladesh. So this is just in the beginning. We are a deltaic plain of which is depending on the Himalayan glacier system in the north, and the rain, the ice melted system coming to our river system, and also the monsoon rains. And the geographic location of Bangladesh is such that it is a kind of a funnel-shaped with the Bay of Bengal. So every year we'll have lots of cyclone systems, storm surges, tidal bores formed at the Bay of Bengal. So therefore, cyclones, floods, river erosion, and occasional droughts, and in recent years, the salinity intrusion because of the sea level rise in the coastal areas. So these are our immediate challenges that we are facing. And with the persistent level of the global temperature rise, say 2 meters rise can potentially inundate about 30% of our coastal area, with the 40 million people displaced by the end of the century with the current levels if we cannot control. By 2050, 13 million people will be displaced, and 2% of our GDP is lost due to natural calamities and the environmental degradation. But interestingly or ironically, Bangladesh, like many other least developed countries, are one of the least emitters or polluters, and thereby contributing to the global sea level rise or warming, but we are one of the worst sufferers. And on the top of that, for the last 2 years, we are also hosting 1.1 million Rohingya refugees from neighboring Myanmar because of their internal conflict. So we are really in a very tight spot right now. Our main staple is rice. And right now, we have been able to increase our rice production 3 times in the last 4 decades with the application of modern technology, high-yielding varieties, and 3-time cropping during the year. And currently, we are the 4th largest rice producer in the world. But you can well imagine what will happen with the increasing floods, salinity intrusion, and other disasters. And also think about the faster melting of the glacier system in the Himalayas, which is like any other glaciers are vanishing quickly, and that means that we will have immediate flooding with that, but also very soon there will be droughts and desertification in many parts of the country. So therefore, adaptation and resilience has to be our top priority, and currently we are doing it with our own resources and trying to involve the private sector, which can play an important role because the public sector has its limitations. So that we have to make the private sector interested in all this. And our scientists have already they have come up with drought-prone and salinity-prone rice varieties. So we are adapting to that. And to handle our natural disasters, a lot of programs have been initiated during the last few decades. If you can recall, 1970 there was a big cyclone in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. 500,000 people died, 500,000. And now in similar cyclones, we have about 100 or 200 deaths. So we have reduced the numbers substantially. But we need more international cooperation. We need for technology transfer, for resources, and also for our own capacity building.
Yes.
So this is very important that we all come together and try to help each other. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's very interesting to hear about all of your different takes on what's going on in your countries and see some of the similarities, but also the differences. And going on from that, I want to ask you all, we can start with one of you, but as UN ambassadors, how do you see the role of big international institutions like the UN? What role should they have in the struggle against the climate change, and what role should they play, and you as representatives in the struggle against the climate changes? So it's free. You want to start?
Okay. The state secretary said earlier that, with these problems, there lies the value of multilateralism and partnership. The UN Secretary General has said that climate change is the defining issue of our time. And it is true that members of the UN, we talk, long-winding statements and all, but it's better to talk than not to talk, because it means that we are trying to find a solution to the problem. And I think the Secretary General has also recognized that it's not science that is missing, but political will. And that is why he has, I think, called for this Climate Action Summit to garner political will. And it's encouraging that he has also prioritized the role of the future generation. And has challenged us to find the solutions to leave a better planet for the future generation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Okay, I think the UN plays a critical role in terms of climate change and climate action. Out of these summits, you have declarations and also resolutions. As I mentioned previously, the UN systems, for example, the UNDP plays a critical role in Dominica in terms of supervision and in terms of ensuring that funds extended to the country is well spent, well placed, and the reporting is also critical, because what you have is donor agencies, they want value for money. So if they place the funds through the UN would report back, and the UN would also ensure that the projects are implemented and implemented properly. So the UN plays a critical role as a facilitator, supervision, and also coordination.
Yeah. So Ambassador Bobby, but does it matter that the small countries like Norway and like your countries, do we really have a voice in these big forums, in these big institutions? As you say, they are vital institutions, but what is our voice and how do we get it through in these big international corporations?
Yes, thank you very much for that question. That, I think, is the place where you can hear all the voices. And that's the strong point of the United Nations. You know, it brings together several elements. I see the political, then scientific aspects, development, cooperation, and sometimes really finance. And we are trying to push the UN to do more of that, to bring the private sector on board, because in recognition of the fact that much of what we need to do cannot be done through ODA alone or just the little development cooperation assistance that comes. We need to bring in the private sector in a big way. And I think the United Nations has a lot of potential there. So for instance, in September, we're seeking to mobilize political will. That's very important, because where multilateralism is under threat, obviously you need to convince, let's remind ourselves of the charter that we signed on to, and see that the survival of mankind, of this earth as we know it, rests upon how we're able to move between now and 2030. So it is an important forum, and I think if we didn't have it, we would have had to create it. And therefore, the idea is to ensure that we can strengthen the organization by giving it the political support. I think that is the place where we need to work, and we should all work to support it in a big way.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I think UN has the strongest convening power. And with this convening power, they can bring in the private sector, they can bring in the scientists, the academia, and most importantly, and increasingly so, the young people, our future, to put pressure on the governments, particularly those governments who are climate change deniers, to strengthen the mitigation efforts in those countries. And partnership and cooperation can flourish in such an environment, and we already know that some of the solutions exist to adapt, to increase resilience. So therefore, we can also, the UN is actually providing a forum for South-South cooperation, on triangular cooperation, so that what Ghana has done, I can also learn from Ghana, and then countries like Norway or Netherlands or Denmark, they can also come in and help us do the things that have already proven right or effective. So there is no alternative to this. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, one last thing. After Hurricane Maria, the UN came in and created a document, what's called the Post-Disaster Needs Assessment for Dominica. And we were able to use that document to go out there in the outside world and say to multilateral organizations as well as countries that we have relations with, this is what happened to us, and this is our need based on what the UN has said. So that document was a trusted document, and it was the basis for the assistance that we received. People trusted that document. It came across as true, and it was really a factual document as to what actually transpired in Dominica and the cost. The UN placed a price, or not a price, but they've assessed the damage and loss as $1.2 billion US, and it was a factual figure. So the UN plays a critical role when they come in and they make the assessment of what is on the ground, and people trust that report.
Thank you. We will see if we can open for comments and questions afterwards.
No, I want to say something about that.
No, sorry, we have to go on. We have a tight schedule, but we'll try to put it in the end. Thank you. But I have a question because you mentioned young people, and for me it's pretty interesting. I am pretty young myself, and especially in Norway and all over the world, there were many protests from young people this spring for demanding climate action and demanding that politicians will do something, not just say that they're doing something. Have you experienced this in your countries? Have you experienced these young people having kind of a rebellion against not doing anything about the climate changes? And what do you want to say to these young people, and what are your encouragements to them?
I think we need to listen to the young people. They see things in a different way. It's no longer business as usual. They do the research and they come up with creative and tangible ways to tackle the effects of climate change. So we need to listen to them and try our best to implement, because they are the future.
Yes.
So we have to ensure that when we get to this ripe old age, the young people are doing the right thing. So give them a chance.
Perfect. That sounds very good. Ambassador, what is your thoughts? What would you like to give as advice to young people who are engaged in climate?
Well, to include them in decision making. This a young lady who is a climate champion said this that resonated with me. It didn't really dawn on me why she said it, but she said, and I've heard this term many times, science is not negotiable. And I think that they see that politics as, we know what to do, but it's when politics is involved, then we do things that we know we shouldn't do. So that, to keep on doing that, I think the lens that they see, these protests is different from those of us much older.
Yes, and I want to say to young people that you have the power to make the change. I recall in South Africa when the young people in Soweto went on that march. Unfortunately, some of them died. I think that was a turning point in the struggle. And I think young people, with your social media and all that goes with it, you can drive industry in terms of what is right to be done. You can do the boycotts. And so when we talk about reducing emissions, and we've also talked about the fact that we know where the big polluters are, and we know what products come out of the big pollution. And so the people to drive that will be the young people. And I urge you to continue. You can make governments change positions. And so continue. I think that we will find room, and I think more and more the United Nations is coming to recognize that it's not just giving them that space to speak for 5 minutes, but to be actually part of the process of change. And I think that is important. So I would encourage young people everywhere to take interest in what is happening, particularly with our climate, and to act for change.
I also agree with my colleagues that young people have the power, and now with the power of social media, they can organize, they can mobilize very quickly compared to when we were young. So that is an additional technological sort of tool that they have at their disposal. And this is actually their also existential question for the young people. For us, our generation, we are more preoccupied with economic growth, economic development, and also the politicization of all the issues. So that sort of hinders progress in this particular field. But young people, they are not obligated by any such constraint. So this is something they can mobilize quickly. But the only unfortunate part is the younger people in the developed countries or industrialized countries, they have perhaps also the luxury of engaging in these issues. But young people in my country, they are more bogged down with day-to-day survival issues. So how they can come together and become a bigger force, I think that we should all encourage in the coming days.
Yeah, thank you. And I like the quote, "You can't argue with science," and it's a very good one. So that's why we're going to bring up two scientists to the panel. So if you can welcome Mr. Kim Holman from the Norwegian Polar Institute and Rolf Røven from Arctic Monitoring and Assessment Program. Welcome. So now you have heard the four ambassadors telling you about, or telling all of us about their situation in their countries. So I want to ask you, how is climate change affecting here in the Arctic? And what changes and what lessons can we learn from countries from all over the world to imply, and how can we fight the climate change with the knowledge from not only our country, but also from other countries as well?
State Secretary, Excellencies, I come from Svalbard, where we see the most rapid and largest temperature changes maybe on the planet. There are very profound changes, and as I say when I speak to media and others, wherever I place my eyes, I can see change during the past decades. We're well past 100 months in a row where the temperature, consecutive months, where the temperature has been above the normal. We see fjords, there is no ice forming on the fjords anymore. The snow melts early in the spring, and we see a lot of change in fauna, new fish, new plankton. Birds do not find their food, so we have changes in the entire ecosystem. And we also see dramatic changes for human beings, in that we now in the warm winters have rain in the winter, and you get ice on the ground, which is a hinder for the reindeer to graze, but also creates ice surfaces that allow for avalanches in a much higher frequency. And that has forced us to build new homes, to a lot of hardship. We have lost lives because of these avalanches. And that is hardship for human beings, of course. So human hardship, great costs for the older. And it is a very profound message, a very forceful message from the Arctic that this is something happening now. I want to say one thing that we've heard a lot about: adaptation and resilience. But a question that I ask more and more often is, what are we supposed to adapt to? What are we supposed to be resilient to? The young farmer or fisherman could ask grandmother or grandfather, what should I fish for? What should I grow? That advice is not valid anymore. Tradition is not helping us. We as scientists are struggling. If we allow the system to change as rapidly as we're allowing it now, the predictability goes down. And what advice should we give? The young farmer, the young fisherman, or society at large? We see very profound, sudden changes in the Arctic, and this is just a forewarning of the unpredictable future that we're forcing the planet into.
Thank you. And Mr. Røven, what are your thoughts on the Arctic climate changes?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Secretary of State and Their Excellencies, for the opportunity to discuss this with you. Following up Kim's presentation there, I guess I would start with an anecdote from back home, from a grandfather's place, and because I grew up in a very northern part of Norway, about a day's drive north of here, and every summer we used to spend summers fishing salmon in the river with my grandfather, and every spring, before every summer, I used to sit down and discuss with my grandfather, so when do the ice leave the river? When can we start fishing? And after a year, after a life living up in the mountains, trapping and hunting and fishing, my grandfather was quite accurate saying whether it was early season or late season, whether the flood will be like severe or whether it will be quite dry. But I remember a day it must have been 88 or 89, in the spring, and I asked the same question in service, so when are we going to start fishing? When will the ice melt? And my grandfather looked at me and said, I don't know. The signs of nature do not fit anymore. The predictability disappears, as Kim said. And that was kind of the first time I heard about climate change before hearing the word. And later in academia and now in my work now, it's kind of what I focus most of my time on. But it kind of sums up in a way, kind of introduce the complexity of the systems, how many details of the system that will be affected and how hard it is for us to predict it. Because, as already mentioned here, we learn from experience, we look back on the past, but what the future we see ahead of us is not something we've seen before. So we have to gain knowledge to know how will the system respond. Just as, in AMAP, what we do is we assess all the scientific evidence available for all of the Arctic and try to conclude what are the changes that we will see. And as already described, the changes are profound. We do see a temperature rise, which is more than twice what we see in the northern hemisphere. We do see a severe loss of ice, both sea ice and land-based ice, which, of course, the latter affects very much what you experience in small islands due to the global sea rise. So what is, I think, one important point we learn, we can discuss here is that things that happen in the Arctic do not stay in the Arctic, as is already mentioned. We are kind of interconnected both through temperature rise, sea level rise, and other climatic effects. And what we need to do is to discuss how can we learn each other, how can we share knowledge, and how can we learn to adapt from each other.
Thank you. And Mr. Holman, like Redwen says, it is all interconnected. And often people ask me, why does countries that aren't in the Arctic, why should they worry about the climate changes in the Arctic, and what changes can be affecting the whole of the world and the whole globe? What are your thoughts on that? Why should other countries, other people not in the Arctic care about the changes that happen up here?
The first one that pops into everyone's mind is, of course, sea level rise. When the glaciers melt, sea level rises. And sea level doesn't work like a bathtub. If you fill water in a bathtub, the whole thing rises. It spreads out, and actually some of the Pacific areas will be most suffering from sea level rise that comes from the glaciers up here. But there are many other reasons. Food security, the fishing up here will be influenced by climate change. The sea ice itself changes temperature patterns, and weather systems are driven by temperature differences. We have changes in the jet stream that thus makes weather patterns quite different from they were before. So far away from the Barents Sea in Korea, Japan, they have cold air outbreaks in the winter because of the sea ice disappearing up here. And recent research also looks at things like the influence of an ice-free Arctic on the monsoon, so food security in much of Asia. But there are other things. We cherish, we value the planet together. And of course, even if you don't see a polar bear in the wild, you might feel that the world is poorer without the polar bears. So natural heritage around the globe, also in the Arctic, is important for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. And to you scientists, and also to our excellencies, the ambassadors, firstly to you, we know about the climate changes. Almost everyone agrees that they are happening, and it is something we need to face. But still, things are going very slowly. And I want to ask you, is it because the science is communicated too poorly or too slowly out to people, or is it because we people or politicians just don't pay enough attention? Why do you think this process is taking so long time for people to actually act upon it? Yeah, Rodman, you can start if you want to.
I guess if I knew the answer to that question, it would be highly valuable. But I think, seen from the scientist side, what kind of change I've seen lately is we have been better to focus on the effects on societies and ecosystems to show how does it affect our everyday life. If you see, for instance, the IPCC 1.5 report, it kind of shows like how much does the difference of a 0.5 degree affect in the number of a million people that will have to flee their homes due to flooding. So it's kind of it instead of just talking about averages in centimeters and so on, it kind of also put the number of people, it put the risks, kind of the risk figures to see how much does the risk increase for a fish collapse, for instance. So it makes it more accessible, I guess, for people, and particularly for enterprises as well regarding risks. So there is a change there, which I think is better. But of course, we can always be better.
Yeah, Mr. Holman.
Well, I'll be personal for a moment. When I was a junior scientist, I worked for Bert Bolin. He was one of or very much instrumental to creating IPCC. I was young and skeptical to such an effort, but after 40 years in the field, I do think we talk more about it. It is much more on the agenda. We as scientists already 40 years ago saw it as an emerging problem, but now we can discuss solutions, we can discuss adaptation, we can discuss uncertainties, and people take it seriously. So we're making progress, too slow, yes, but it is a much different place than it was 40 years ago.
Yeah. Ambassador Bannis-Roberts, do you have any last
Yes,
thoughts
certainly.
about it?
Again, it boils back to political will. Some people must see to believe. There's always resistance to change, because to combat climate change, we all have to make a conscious effort based on the science to change. So yes, there's a delay on the political will, but as a people, are we prepared to accept that climate change is here, it's real, and do not wait until something happens to prove that climate change is here? So as I said, we have to share information, but our people must also be prepared to receive that information and adjust to the changes that are being recommended. Otherwise, we'll fail.
Thank you. And now I would like to... Do you have a comment?
Yes,
comment?
a very
Yes.
brief one.
Yes.
And it's actually to complement what has been said. Yes, the communication, the message has to go out, but how is it communicated? I think it should be communicated in a way that would reach out to the broader public. You know, science is very difficult sometimes to decipher for the ordinary person, lay persons like us. But if you were to put it in the kind of language that the rural farmer in Ghana, a village in Ghana, will understand why the rains are not coming at the time that they should, I think in terms of mobilizing broader support for change and for governments and people to accept, we stand a better chance. And so it shouldn't just be in the research institutions or at the high political level, but we should find a way of disseminating it to the ordinary people.
Yeah, do you have a last short comment? Yeah.
No, my comment is to our scientist friends that there are still some scientists in this world who are manipulating data, or I don't know how they're generating, but they are misleading some of our leaders in terms of believing that climate change is not happening, despite obvious evidences. So I would ask the scientific community also to get their acts together so that there is no such misleading information out there to be manipulated by others who are in a position. And then the whole capitalist system that is working now is based on profitability. And therefore, as long as we have this greed factor amongst us, it would be very difficult. So we have to take collective responsibility. This is one world, our world. We need to survive and make this world so continue. And for that, I think our industry has to also take a leadership in terms of linking profitability with climate change related adaptation and mitigation programs. Only then I think we can proceed.
Thank you, Ambassador. And now I would like to open for some questions. And first, I would like to give the word to our friend from Palestine. If you want to ask your question, we would love to hear what you had to say earlier.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the presenters and the scientists. I don't want to ask a question. I think that the students maybe should be asking the questions, but I am the chair of the largest negotiating group at the United Nations, the group of 77 and China, 135 countries. And with regard to the question, what is the UN doing on this issue? I was party to the Copenhagen conference about 10 years ago, just down the road from here. And we negotiated as an international community an agreement, a contract, if you wish. Of course, my colleagues, they gave details about stories of their countries. But here at the UN, since all of us, as the scientists tell us, are in this issue together, then together we decided of what to do. Among the things that we decided what to do, which also were refined further in Paris, which I also attended, and we agreed in Paris about certain plans and details, which means that we collectively agreed what to do. Now, the issue or the big elephant in this room are governments abiding by and implementing of the plan of what we agreed of what to do. And the answer, no. Because for us in the South, we agreed in Copenhagen that by the year 2020, there should be $100 billion put forward annually in order to address mainly the issue of adaptation. Because Dominica alone cannot do it, nor the Marshall Islands, or Uganda, or all nations. And they are not responsible for polluting. The scientists tell us they are polluting. The discussion is not, for example, in the Arctic region between the government that is polluting or responsible for polluting and the people, the scientists saying that we see the adverse effect here in the Arctic area. We see the adverse effect in the countries of the South, and it is an existential issue for us. So therefore, we need to implement. We are happy that the government of Norway, for example, that they have an ambitious plan, as was articulated by the Deputy Foreign Minister today, that by the year 2050, you want to emit somewhere between 80 to 95. Frankly speaking, and you are students here and activists, I like what I heard from the mayor of Oslo, who said that they have a plan and running for election on a plan in few days. I don't know what the mayor is running on a plan here in this city. He said that by the year 2030, they want to reach 95% of emission. I like the plan of Oslo. I like the plan of cities who are taking a lead in this regard. So therefore, I think that for activists, and I was very radical when I was a student and very active on social issues, I believe that you have to push government in order to meet the obligations, the global ones and the specific ones that you demand from them, so that the scientists, if they want to remain neutral, which is fine, they can remain neutral in terms of explaining to us the phenomena. But we as politicians, we have to decide what to do with it. And what we need to do, we need to pollute less so that the temperature of Earth doesn't keep going up and the snow to melt and the glaciers. And for us in the South, that we do not do that to survive. When we say adaptation, to survive in terms of food, in terms of not, drowning, and so on and so forth. So therefore, I think that we need governments to do much more and be on the watch out and tell them to implement what they need to do.
Thank you. You should be up here too as well. Thank you.
Excuse me.
Somebody
Yeah, there's someone waving back there. And if you have a question, just put your hand in the air and someone will come with a microphone. And keep the questions short so everyone will have time to ask their questions. Thank you.
Political will has been mentioned several times here, and I think the last speaker also addressed it very nicely. We are very soon going to have local elections here in Norway, and if you go a few decades back after the Brundtland Commission, the slogan "Think globally, act locally" permitted the discussions. Today, some people think we have a toll road crisis. People driving cars think they pay too much taxes when they cross toll rings, versus a climate crisis, which the average citizen doesn't feel or doesn't realize. So my question to the panel is, do you have any advice to local politicians to be elected and to us as electorate and citizens here in Tromsø before the general elections here?
Thank you. Ambassador Chigiyal, do you want to start answering? Or
Well, I think the first thing that we learn as diplomats is not to interfere in local politics.
I would advise, for the politicians to listen to the young people. What the young people they demand, I think they should listen to that rather than the people who are 40 plus or something.
Great answers. I agree. I think we have another question here in the front. We have time for one more. I have a gentleman over here.
Yes, and thank you to the panel. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I'm a professor of political science here. You have referred to political will almost as a magical term. My question to you is, what is the political problem at the multilateral level? Because this is not, how to say, a magical issue that we cannot address in a rational way. These are concrete political, legal, economic questions to resolve at multilateral level. The world has all kinds of treaties making the world go round. So what is the concrete political, economic, legal challenges to move forward on this issue, and how to do that? Thank you.
Thank you. Do any of you want to?
I think during yesterday's discussion, the professor himself talked about game theory, and this is how the individual players they form these political ideas, and then the political leaders they are also aligned with the top business people or business houses in the country, and also the majority of population. So each of these subcategories they need to have some stake in the formation of this political will. So and if there is certain alignment, then the political will would be there. If the business feels completely different, if the unemployed people feel totally different, then so the political leaders cannot act in vacuum. So in each country, the political will would be shaped in a different manner, and in a global setting, you mentioned that when sufficient number or there is a kind of a threshold level of political will's alignment, then we can get decisions. Otherwise, we'll be stuck in political impasse rather than going forward.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just an observation. There may be political will, but with different political systems, an administration may think one way and sign this agreement, you have another administration coming in, say, 5 years later, and the thinking is different. So sometimes a country may commit, and then with a change of administration, there's a different thinking as to what obtained. So sometimes there's a little delay in terms of even after an agreement has been signed, a new administration with a different thinking, a different vision, is not in agreement with what was signed. So there's this constant delay as to implementation.
Not in Norway.
Thank you so much. And as the last question, I would like to answer.
I can speak without a microphone, there's no problem. You mentioned, Sarah, in your opening statement that one of the important things would be to pick the interest of the private sector to cooperate with the government, the public sector. Thank you. What is actually the step to make actually the private sector interested in this? Because of course they are following an economic interest. That's clear to everyone. And even if the moral level they want to contribute, it should be a certain incentive. For example, my main activity is based in China and Shenzhen, and the government made a deal. All the taxis there are electric. Half of the public system transportation is electric. Soon it is going to be 100% there. So how can the government, spike the interest of the public sector or the private sector to actually contribute to this and help us to overcome all the disasters that is coming towards us?
I mean, incentivize various activities of the private sector to align their work in the climate-friendly manner. So the mitigation efforts, the adaptation efforts, if the government reduces the taxes, if the government gives some initial subsidies, so there can be various mechanisms of incentivizing. And once the private sector thinks that their profitability will not be compromised, I think they will be on board, because they are only motivated by profitability. So there is no charity involved here. So if we can stick to that, then I think private sector can be on board.
And just a quick addition is, more and more we're trying to sell the story of sustainability does not mean non-profitability. Profitability can go with sustainability, and it's gaining acceptance within the private sector, and hence the conversation as to how to include them. In Ghana, I'll just share a quick example. For the SDGs, though, the president called a number of companies, about 20 of them, and they have the corporate responsibility, that tiny element they put in. He says, I want you to pull all of that together and scale it up, and let's see how we can direct that for SDGs. And within the first year, in fact, we are still in the first year, we raised 500 million for SDG implementations in sectors that normally they wouldn't want to put their money there. And so it's doable. It's just the narrative we take and making people understand that indeed we're all in it. When it comes to the climate, I think it should be easier to let them see that sustainability equals profitability.
Thank you. And we need to round up now, but I have a last question to all of you, and we can start with you, Rolf, you wanted to say something. And my question is, we talked a lot about climate change, and it is serious, and it is a great reason to worry for all of us. But I want to ask you, is there hope? Is there something for my generation to look forward to, and is there a solution to all of this? And do you have something that can give me a bit hope, and all of us hope to go out of this talk?
Thank you. I would emphasize what you're saying. It is serious. The effects are profound. And just to address one of the comments earlier, although there are some scientific arguments against climate change, the overall profound evidence is that it is taking place and it's anthropogenic. I think there's hope. And there's two reasons. One is what was just mentioned here about the private sector. What I experience is that we see private sector very interested in adaptation and to build resilience. They would like to know risks. How do they adapt to the risk that they take? For instance, like fish farming, road construction, so on. They would like to adapt to risk. But I also think that the greatest hope is actually what has been mentioned so many times today is the young people, the new generation, because they're much more concerned and much more into the effects of climate change than what ours as well when I grew up. So I think the hope is in how we are able to take the changes into us and to adapt to them and drive the adaptation. So thanks.
Thank you.
I often get the question, are you an optimist or a pessimist? And I answer, I'm an optimist because there is no alternative. It is, we have a long way to go, it's going too slowly and whatnot, but we must. I think I'll pick up on a word that Ambassador Poby used, the narrative. We must emphasize a narrative where the choices are not that we're giving up something. The choices are made in order to be able to grow food, in order to be able to have a better future. We must take hold of the narrative such that it's not always defensive. Then I have to give up this, or then I won't be able to do this. No, we want to do it because it creates a better future for all of us.
I see hope when I look at scientists. I see hope when I look at innovators, technology providers giving solution, and also I see hope looking at young activists. Definitely I see hope.
Yeah.
Well, mine is simple. I see young people like you, and I have hope.
Thank you.
There is hope. We have no choice. The time is now, and we must act. Otherwise, the next generation is going to hold us responsible. We must change. We must do the necessary adjustments and amendments. We have to, adaptation and mitigation is key, and we have to take on board the recommendations of our young people. They are the future. There is hope, but we have to act and act now.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it's been said that we are the generation to make that change. And to address that, we have to look at the planet as the only home that we all have. And there is no plan B. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I want to invite up the State Secretary, Mr. Jens Holte, and also Ole Overtveit to say some final words to sum up this discussion.
Thank you. It's been a good discussion. I'm also going to be a bit diplomatic and not go into the local elections, but I'm doing local elections when I'm not state secretary, and I'm knocking doors in Bergen. But what I think has changed profoundly is the emphasis being placed on climate and environmental issues in this election. We also saw in the 2017 election that in studies done there, what really made the biggest increase in voter importance, it was climate and environment. So I think that's a great sign of the political will that we have been talking about here. The momentum is growing, and it's something that politicians should take note of. And I think the discussion here also sums up that point very well. So, thank you.
Yes, I would like to echo that, and also echo on what Kim said, that we all have to be optimists because we have no choice. So I think that's a very good final word to take with us. I would like to thank you all for coming here today. It's been a really interesting discussion, and it's been interesting and good questions from the audience. Thank you so much to our experts. And thank you to your excellencies for your very thoughtful and good inputs and answers to our questions. Finally, I would like to thank our very competent moderator, Alexandra. Please give her a hand. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Thank you.